Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have Rob Berger here on the Goldstein on Gelt Show. He's not only a litigation attorney based in Washington, D.C., and the founder of Doughroller.net, but he's a real expert in personal finance and investing. Rob, a real pleasure to have you.
Well, Doug, thanks for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
So one of the things that you talk about is financial freedom. And frankly, that's a word that personally I use. And I feel it's getting batted around a little bit, maybe too much in the radio and podcast and personal financial world. So let's go to some of the basics. How do you define financial freedom?
Yeah, I kind of look at financial freedom as a bit of a continuum. I think ultimately, it's sort of the ultimate financial freedom is your ability to live off your investments without having to work. But I think for a lot of people, that's so far away, that it doesn't have much meaning. And so, there is sort of a continuum. I mean, people just starting out, maybe even in debt, but once you get to the point where you're just not living month to month, you have an extra degree of financial freedom. And once you get, your credit card debt paid off and your school loans paid off, you kind of get even that much closer, and it gives you more flexibility and more options with your money. So I kind of see it as in stages. But ultimately, it is your ability to live off your investments, which is both a function of how much money you have in the bank, how it's invested, but also how much you spend. So there are folks that I know that are financially free, and they don't make they're very much sort of in the average in terms of income, but they've managed their money and their expenses in a way that they can now at a relatively young age do whatever they want in their lives.
I guess that's sort of an area that I work in a lot because I work with mostly people who left the United States for any of a number of reasons. Frankly, most of them are in Israel and they left for ideological reasons. But there are a lot of people who leave simply because the cost of living is cheaper in another country and they're able to achieve financial freedom much more easily. Have you found that also?
Yeah, it's certainly true, depending on where you move. But, there are plenty of places in the U.S., though, where you can still live a fairly modest on a fairly modest amount of money. I don't happen to live in one of those places, but I grew up in one of those places. I grew up in Ohio. My father was from Cleveland and grew up in Columbus, and it's a different world than Washington D.C. So there's certainly plenty of places in the United States where you can live on a modest income, and you can buy a home without spending a small fortune. Although, sure, you could. There are folks that I know that have moved overseas and other places where perhaps the cost of living is even less. I don't know what it's like in Israel.
It's pretty expensive here.
Yeah,
actually,
that's what I would have guessed.
It's the people who move to the Far East or South America who do find it cheaper. One of the issues I think that a lot of people have is the never enough syndrome, which is a guy might say, if only I had $1 million, I'd be okay. And then, he gets that $1 million. And he goes, well, maybe not. Maybe if I had $2 million. In fact, I remember when I was little, my father used to say, when the Dow Jones hits 3,000, you're going to retire. Here we are 13, 14,000 points higher. And, well, he eventually did retire. But, people, they seem to have a goal, but they really can't stick to it because they're afraid of this financial freedom. Why is that?
Well, that's a good question. I have to confess, Doug, that it kind of describes me because I envisioned slowly getting out of the practice of law 5 years ago. And I had all these plans, and it wasn't based on the Dow, but it was based on, my investments, and I'll go part-time, and then I'll slowly work my way down to retired. And I'm in far better, financial shape today, let's say, than I was 5 or 6, 7 years ago. And I still practice law. So it is a scary thing, particularly when you're younger. I'm 48. When you're younger, the thought of sort of, giving up your career, whatever it might be, and relying on, mutual funds or whatever your investments are, is a scary thing. I mean, I don't even think it's so much about wanting a lot of stuff, although that can be a problem. But most people that want a lot of stuff don't end up in the position where they can retire early to begin with, right? But it is a scary thing. You feel like you don't have. I think there's an illusion of control when you're working for your money that you don't have when it's the stock market, because the stock market seems so out of control.
Right. Well, it's funny you call it the illusion. We're talking to Rob Berger, who is an attorney in Washington, D.C. He's also a real expert on personal finance. He has a blog and a great podcast. He's been talking to us about the concept of financial freedom and maybe why, even if he could be financially free, he hasn't quite taken the step yet. But Rob, I know you've got a financial freedom calculator. How does that work?
Yeah. So basically, it takes the percentage of your income that you save. If you're saving 5%, then of course that means you're spending 95%. And it uses those percentages and makes different assumptions about returns, and you can change these assumptions. I mean, it just calculates based on an assumed return how long it will take you saving whatever percent of your income you're saving, 5, 10, some people save 50%, whatever the number is, how long it will take you to be completely financially free. And I define financial freedom as having 25 times your annual expenses. And that's just a sort of a rule of thumb based on what's known as the 4% withdrawal rate. It's the assumption you can withdraw 4% of your investments in retirement and then adjust it each year for inflation and have a reasonable chance of not outliving your money. You could adjust the numbers. You could assume 3.5% or something, but that's what the calculator assumes. And you just, figure out where you are, what percentage of your income you're saving, what you think you'll get in your investment returns, and it'll tell you how many years, for better or worse, you have to go before you achieve financial freedom.
I'm glad you brought up the 4% rule, because this is something that is spoken about in the media, and some people, I think, actually rely on it too much. But when you said it, you actually touched on something interesting, which is you said the 4% rule adjusted for inflation. What do you mean by that?
Well, the 4% rule says, in year one of retirement, you can withdraw 4% of your nest egg, whatever that is. And then in the second year, you throw the 4% number out. You just take what you withdrew the previous year and increase it by the inflation rate wherever you live. And then each year you just continue to adjust it by inflation. At least that's the theory behind the 4% rule.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this actually works as a tool that people should use in planning their retirement?
I do, actually. I think it's a perfectly fine tool for planning purposes. I also think it's fine if people, maybe you want to take a slightly more conservative approach and assume, a 3.5%. I mean, as the percentage you assume goes down, the amount of money you need in the bank to achieve the same dollar number goes up, right? But I think for planning purposes, 4% is reasonable. There's a lot of articles out there that say, maybe it should be a little less. I think when you get to retirement, though, I'm not so sure it's actually a great rule to live by. But I think from a planning perspective, I think it's a perfectly fine approach to planning your retirement.
So in today's market, when interest rates are so low, the people, if someone retires and says, if I want my money safe, I'm going to put it into the bank and get all of about 0%. So if I take 4% a year, I'm literally going to be eating into principal and adjust that by inflation every year. And I'm going to be drilling a huge hole in my future safety. What can someone who is retired now do, given the fact that interest rates are just so low?
Well, now this is going to get into my perspective on investing. I think a savings account is not a very safe investment. I know it feels safe because, at least here in the U.S., it's FDIC insured, so it feels safe. Your balance isn't going to go down, but on an inflation-adjusted basis, you're guaranteed to lose money.
Right.
So even when you're retired, let's say you retire at 65, depending on taking average lifespans, you've got 15, 20, 25 years of investing left. So you still are a long-term investor. And in my mind, you need to still be tilted towards equities. It might be 60-40 or 50-50. I don't think there's a single right answer. And the rest are going to probably be in bonds, not in the bank, at least for the most part. You'll have some in the bank. So the 4% rule assumes that you're still invested. If you're going to take everything and put it in a bank account, then 4% is going to give you a lot of trouble. You're just not going to be able to make it that way, I don't believe. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it's true even if we look at the interest rates, we see how low they are, but it's interest rates compared to inflation. So even if interest rates were 5%, but if inflation were higher, you could still run into the exact same problem.
So drill into that a little bit more, because I think actually we may be entering a time when inflation is picking up and people are retiring. So how would someone calculate that?
Well, I mean, it's looking at nominal returns versus the real rate of return. So it's after inflation return. So let's say you get 5% on a savings account, but inflation, I'll just make a number up, is 4%. Well, you've beat out inflation. That's good, but your after inflation return is 1%. And that percentage, it seems year to year, it seems small, seems kind of insignificant. But if I can just do a quick detour, I was going through a bunch of my paperwork this weekend, and I found a receipt from my stepmother, whose father bought her a 1965 Mustang for graduation in 1965, brand new blue hardtop coupe. I mean, wouldn't you love to have that car right now?
Absolutely.
You know how much it cost in 1965? Brand new two-door Mustang?
$2,000.
$2,200.
Well, I guessed it. Wow, there
you guessed it. So, I mean, when you look at inflation, inflation is the kind of thing you got to look at over the long term to really see its impact and feel it. But, over 20 years of retirement, it's going to make a big dent into your, the spending power of your money. So you got to have investments that are going to do better than inflation. And a savings account, sometimes it can, depends on the market, but usually it's not the best way to invest your money.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I actually think a lot of times people talk to me in my day job as a financial advisor, and they reminisce about getting 10, 15% on their bank deposits. And then I just have to remind them that was at a period of time when inflation rate was at the same thing. Right. So you weren't actually coming out ahead by doing that. Right. Rob, we've actually covered quite a bit, but unfortunately we're just about out of time. So tell us in the last few seconds, how can people follow you and follow the work that you're doing?
Well, the best way is just to go to doughroller.net. You can check out the blog. You'll see a link for the podcast, and I have a free newsletter that I send out every Saturday, and you'll see a link for that. So the doughroller.net would be the best way. I write for Forbes and other publications, so you can find me there too. But you'll see links to that on doughroller.net as well.
Okay, and we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Rob Berger, thanks so much for your time.
Appreciate it, Doug. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world. If you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.